If you enjoy Astronomy FM radio, please let us know with a small donation. We do rely on your support, and it's true. Every little bit counts.
AFM. You are listening to a universe of possibilities. This is Astronomy FM.
Coming up next, an Astronomy.fm original program. It's time for York Universe, a co-production of the Observatory of York University, Toronto, and the Voice of Astronomy. AFM Radio, AFM Radio, AFM Radio, AFM Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to York Universe, the weekly broadcast of astronomy and astrophysics out of the York University Astronomical Observatory. Who knows what's going to happen tonight, but we'll have to play it by ear. But at any rate, at this point in time, you're listening to one of the three hosts, and we hope to have all three. My name is Paul Delaney. I am joined by Jen.
Hello.
And I'm not at all sure, but we are trying desperately to patch in Jesse. Are you there at all, Jesse, at the moment?
I am here, but I'm super delayed.
Well, actually, that was the strongest signal that you've given us all night at this point in time. At any rate, York Universe comes to you every Monday evening at around about 9 p.m. local Eastern Daylight Time here in North America, and brought to you by the student, faculty, staff, and darn good friends of York University. Of course, 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time here in North America translates to 1 a.m. Universal Time at this time of the year. We, of course, run this presentation in concert with our online public viewing experience. And as we speak, the Observatory team, I can see at least Will and Siren, are working away merrily. By all means, please point your favorite web browser to observatory.info.yorku.ca. Or, of course, if you actually have the old one, astronomy.blog.yorku.ca, that works too. Of course, we do this as part of Astronomy Night in Canada. It's Monday night, and of course, the entire lineup is Canadian. You've got ourselves, York Universe, followed by, and not necessarily in this order, but Western Worlds, Science for the People, Quirks and Quarks. Lots of good stuff on the run-up, of course, to, yes, July 1st, that's Canada Day at the end of this week. If you've got any comments that you wish to pass along to us about past presentations or future show ideas, by all means, send it across to observe@yorku.ca. Follow us on Twitter, which is at York Universe, if memory serves. By all means, find a way to communicate with us, and we'll be happy to entertain the commentary. So, how's life there, Jen?
It's great. It's been clear the past couple of nights, which has been wonderful. It's a change from the winter weather that we've had.
Yes, indeed, to say the very least. Although last night was a little bit on the wet side, at least where I was, and I, for one, was very happy to see the rain come down.
I got a migraine from that.
Sorry about that. That's definitely not what I wanted to hear. That's for sure. But my ground was beginning to resemble something akin to concrete. You know, it was dry, and really dry. So the rain was desperately needed. Research project, which we'll tell you about in the future. At the moment, though, fingers crossed that it stays clear enough for the team to get out there.
Absolutely. It's definitely getting exciting in the observatory with our new CCDs and all. We're pushing our limits.
Absolutely. And, of course, they've now been brilliantly characterized by somebody I know. Yeah, that's Jen. Jen has been working tirelessly for about the last month characterizing both of our new CCDs. So, yes, she now knows everything that you ever wanted to know about the CCDs, but were afraid to ask.
Maria Mayer. She was born on June 28th in 1906, so happy birthday to Maria. She was the second female in physics to win the Nobel Prize, and she actually won the Nobel Prize for proposing the nuclear shell model of the atomic nucleus. So super cool for her. I looked a little bit into her history because I started getting curious, of course, and she has a very interesting path she followed. So it turns out that her father was in academia, and she ended up being the seventh straight generation within her family that was a university professor. Rockefeller, and with him, she ended up moving to Johns Hopkins University. This was in 1930. But unfortunately, at the time when she did that, it was around the Depression. And of course, universities at that time won't just employ a wife of a professor just because it's the wife of a professor. So she ended up not working as a professor at the time, but she didn't leave physics behind. She did physics for fun, kept working on it, as anyone who chooses to leave academia should do, continue working on it. And she actually wonderful. She had a lot of people kind of helping her pave the way. And in 1948 is when she started working with her magic numbers, the numbers that ended up helping her win the Nobel Prize. It took her about another year to find the explanations she was looking for, and several years to find the consequences of what those numbers really, really meant. And at the beginning, she really wasn't convinced that what she was coming across was really it. But it actually turned out that three other people she had never met before had actually come up with the exact same explanation as she did.
Biographer in that regard.
That's what I do best.
Yeah. I freely admit that I did not know very much. I've heard of Marie, but all of the bits and pieces that you just cited are actually, not well put in, shall we say, standard physics textbooks.
Absolutely. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, very neat indeed. And the Nobel Prize was won when?
Ooh, that's a good question. Actually, I'll get back to you on that.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I was trying to. Diligently away on things, you can trip across all sorts of great stuff.
I mean, she also hit a few bumps on the road where she wasn't able to get work. And I think the important part in all of this is that she didn't stop doing her own work, and that's what got her recognized.
Correct,
Uh,
and that's
yeah,
right. Very
yeah,
determined indeed. That's for sure.
absolutely.
Well, happy birthday, Marie, or Maria, I guess I should say. Jesse, are you with us to try and carry on with the work?
I'll attempt. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can so far, mate.
being about just over 100 objects that Messier cataloged, and these are various things in the night sky that do not look like stars. So the reason Messier built this catalog was because he was a comet hunter. He wanted to find comets. He wanted to be the comet hunter extraordinaire and find as many as possible, as did many at the time, because they're very interesting objects. And so what he did was he just, started scanning the night sky, and he kept coming across weird things, weird hazy things, nebulous. Nebulae to star clusters to other galaxies. Pretty much it's a who's who of weird and interesting things in the night sky that Messier was cataloging at at the time while he was looking for his comets. So it ended up being about 100 objects or so, and it got added to and expanded upon later on, closer to now. And so I believe the final tally is somewhere near 110 at the moment, or maybe 111.
110.
And 110. There you go. And so
recall, Tom Luton has actually done it. Hats off to Tom, and anybody else in the chat room has done it. But we concluded, Jesse, last week that was far, far too much work for one night.
that it does sound like it'd be a crazy amount. I mean, I've only seen I don't know, 15 of them myself, just over my entire lifetime as an astronomer. Mostly because I wouldn't characterize myself as an amateur astronomer in the sense of I honestly haven't spent a lot of time observing the night sky. Most of my astronomy
Time when the night is long enough that you can grab a hold, move from one object to the other. If you know the sequence and choreograph it carefully, you can actually get to all of them from twilight to twilight in and around the vernal equinox.
That would be impressive, and maybe one day I'll attempt that when I get my own telescope and start doing this for a little bit more fun rather than as a professional activity. Do either of you two know the other person who added to the Messier catalog? Because there was another person.
Well, the other 7 though 103 objects were officially associated with Messier himself, the conclusion was that 110 really had been spotted by the Messier-Machin duo.
Oh, wait. Hold on. The story. So I'm on Wikipedia right now, if you can believe anything there. So let's see. Messier 1 is Crab Nebula. Messier 31, of course, is Andromeda. And the first edition came from Nicolas Flammarion in 1929, who added 104. 105 to 107 were added by Helen Sawyer Hogg in 47.
Canadian.
was a French astronomer who was alive at the time of Messier and contributed to his observations.
Correct. He was his assistant in that regard. Okay. All right. So we'll obviously have to do a little bit more research in this regard. Those missing 7 objects, I thought, were originally observed by Messier, but for whatever reason, never made it into the original catalogue. So I'm wondering whether or not the astronomers that you cited actually did the legwork to conclude that Messier probably did see them. But okay, we'll have to stay tuned on that one.
Yep.
And he realized that it actually wasn't moving relative to the background of the stars, and therefore it wasn't a comet, and that's how he came about the Crab Nebula, which was his first catalog number by mistake.
Well, certainly Charles Messier is often referred to as a frustrated comet hunter, and that's what drove him to start cataloguing these objects. It's also worth noting that he eventually did get 13 comets to his name, but of course he's got at least 103 or 110, whichever arithmetic you want to use, non-stellar objects to his name. And yeah, well, whichever them visual observations, many others photographic observations. There's a Japanese astronomer who has found a similar number. A countryman of mine, Bill Bradfield, who has now passed away, unfortunately, picked up at least 14. There are many amateur astronomers over the last 100 years who have done yeoman service as far as finding comets, and it takes them something like 100 hours of observing time per comet. So it is a labor of love,
Wow.
Jen.
Indeed, and in cold weather.
Of Transit 4A. Really exciting title. Sorry about that. The transit system was called Navsat, and it was the forerunner actually to the GPS network, the Global Positioning System. The Navsat satellite system was designed, not surprisingly, for navigational purposes and used primarily by the US Navy. Transit 4A itself weighed in at about 175 pounds. So for us folks here north of the border, that's around about, I don't know, I guess about 70 kilos, a little more, maybe 80 kilograms. The Transit 4 familiar because all of our satellites prior to Juno crossing the asteroid belt were powered by RTGs. So the Voyagers, the Pioneers, and so on, New Horizons, all charging out there with RTGs on board, Cassini, etc., etc. Believe it or not, this spacecraft, Transit 4A, was built by the Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University. Also should sound really familiar. And I'm just reading my notes. Jen, you were going to actually talk about the beginning of this, weren't you? it received very little fanfare as far as the launch was concerned. I was paying a great deal of attention to the space program and the space race at that moment in time, and the Navsat system was obviously launched as a military asset, shall we say. And despite the height of the Apollo program, because of course we had the Apollo 7 mission launching in August of 1968 after the Apollo 1 fire of January 67, there was lots and lots of interest. I do not remember positioning satellite system. So, it had better part of 30 years of operation. I believe the first Navsat was probably launched in and around 1963, 64. I'm not quite sure of that. Transit 4A was certainly 68, but by definition, 4A, it was at least the fourth satellite launch there, and there were certainly several others. And they were into polar orbits as well, just as a matter of interest. So, yeah. Okay. Sorry for stealing your thunder there, kiddo.
So just out of curiosity, what did Juno launch with? I mean, I know I should know this.
Solar. Guska for us. You're doing a real good role.
I can give it a shot. How am I sounding?
You're sounding great, mate. Really sounding better than when you were in the office next door to me. No, I didn't.
Okay.
Go for
next one. June 30th. Actually, that's my father's birthday, now that I think about it. So that's coming up on, what's that, Thursday this week?
Yes, it is.
Okay, got to remember. I got to call my dad. Okay. So June 30th, 1908, my father's birthday coincides with one of the most impressive asteroid or meteor or a massive area of forest with what would seem like a huge explosion. Of course, there was nobody living there, and there was no wars, and there was certainly no atomic bomb level technology at the time. So the only explanation for something like this would be a meteor, comet, or asteroid making an impact or an airburst above the region. So the impact itself is somewhere between 60 and 100, 60 to 190 meters. The impactor. And now, yeah. So the one that happened above Chelyabinsk was very famous because of so many dash cams in Russia due to so many insurance fraud claims that everybody has dash cams, which is really great for astronomers. But that's a side note. The one there was probably somewhere about 20 meters in size, whereas the one that hit above Tunguska was about 100 meters in size. So this thing was much bigger, and if there was a city there, it certainly would have leveled it. It leveled the forest that was it was above. And just keep in mind that both Chelyabinsk and Tunguska it was such a it's just sort of in this range between not big enough to hit the ground directly, but not small enough either. It was this sort of middle area where it sort of airbursts. And I have some numbers here that apparently, if you were to compare it to an atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima or back in the mid-1940s, it would be about 1,000 times greater than that.
Wow. That's a serious amount of energy, isn't it?
It is, and luckily for humans, it was nowhere near any major settlements. However, I mean, I
I agree. Absolutely. And of course, there are probably a large number of events that are taking place out over ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, so on that, we're not even aware of. The U.S. military or the various military satellites might be aware of them. But, if there's nobody there to see them and no damage gets created, then of course, it goes completely undetected by most of us.
It makes me wonder, don't they have like some sort of acoustical network to detect, to look for nuclear bomb detonations in?
Too bad.
Sorry, before you continue on to the next thing, there's Asteroid Day that's literally dedicated to this specifically. It's also on June 30th, and it's officially a global event. It started in 2015, but it's basically
cool.
Yeah. Have you not heard of that yet?
I've never heard of Asteroid Day.
You should create an event in your area. It's to inform people and to get as much amateur astronomers involved in searching for a potential hazardous asteroid. So they kind of want to involve and inform as many people as possible. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson recently released a video.
The chat room itself, there's a good lively conversation going on over at observatory.info.yorku.ca. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see it. I can see lots of people typing and commentary must be happening, but I'm not actually seeing it. So I'm hoping it's just me, and I'm not going to refresh my browser, because if I refresh my browser, I could destroy the chat room, because I'm sort of the kingpin host here. But I am hoping that the conversations are carrying on properly over in the chat room. So anyway, fingers. It was the last of the two-person shuttle crews. The two shuttle astronauts in this case were Ken Mattingly from Apollo 13 and Apollo 16 fame. Apollo 13, of course, Ken Mattingly was meant to be the command module pilot. He was purported to have been coming down with the measles. Never happened. Never flew on Apollo 13. He actually did fly Apollo 16. And his companion aboard STS-4 was Henry Hartsfield. It was a 7-day mission. They finally came down at Edwards Air Force Base, the first time they actually landed on a concrete backup crews. Up until this point in time, they always had a fully fledged backup crew ready to rock and roll, hence why Ken Mattingly was swapped out for Jack Swigert aboard Apollo 13. But after STS-3, they more or less said, no, we're not going to do this. And officially, STS-4 was the first mission in which there were no backup crews prepared. And they started training the individual crew members to back each other up instead.
Oh, that's not a bad plan at all.
No, well, it's probably when you started having the space shuttle fleet.
And how famous is Ken Mattingly with the Apollo 13 fame? I feel like the movie really, I don't know, highlighted how unfortunate it was for him to be sort of stricken off the Apollo 13 crew. Although his help on the ground was very, very important.
It was,
but he's got a very famous name because of that movie.
Absolutely, and he never even came down with the measles. I mean, that was the other irony of the whole affair. He was sidelined because they were worried he was going to have the measles, and of course, in a capsule with his comrades, that was not going to be cool. But he never actually contracted it. So, folks, if you've just joined us, you're listening to York Universe, the weekly broadcast of astronomy and astrophysics brought to you by the York University Astronomical Observatory. You're listening to Jesse, Jen, and myself, Paul, wax somewhat eloquently about this week in space and astronomy history. By all means, point your favorite web browser over to astronomy.blog.yorku.ca or observatory.info.yorku.ca. Join the chat room. Hopefully you are able to see each other, just because I can't, and have a look at some of the imagery that is being displayed in our various pods by the observatory team. One quick note to everybody. This time next week is July 4th, a fairly auspicious day in history. And as a consequence, the entire Astronomy.fm crew is going to be off partying furiously. Who knows where? As a consequence, we will not be broadcasting a live episode next Monday evening, July 4. Okay, so we will take an extended Canada Day long weekend. Yes, Canada is 149 years old this coming Friday. And so we will declare Monday a holiday for York Universe. There we go. Okay.
Is everybody going to go watch the new movie Independence Day?
I plan to, yes.
It looks amazing.
20 years ago, that original movie. It's hard to believe.
I know, right, Paul? See, now I get to say that I feel old and you can't say anything.
There you go. Jesse, welcome to the club.
Thank you.
But I agree. It looks a good movie. I'm going to wait for the crowds to die down, though, a little bit.
Yeah, Amanda had to get her ticket well in advance before going, so definitely wait a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, hey, there's other good movies out there at the moment. My wife and I are going to go and see Dory. Finding Dory? Losing Dory?
I want to see that so bad.
Something about Dory at any rate. All right, moving right along here. Jen, I refuse to do this story, so please proceed.
Okay, but I didn't know what Juno. Oh, sorry, we're not even on Juno yet. We're on Hubble first. Sorry.
Come on, I'm the one who can't read. Not you.
My apologies. Okay, so Hubble, yes. We keep hearing about the James Webb Telescope, which makes us feel like Hubble's coming to an end, but Hubble's actually not done just yet. So NASA recently decided to extend the contract for Hubble for another 5 years, starting now. The agency awarded sole source contract extension as of June 23rd, and that's basically to support continuing the Hubble operations. The extension period is from July 1st, very soon, until June 30th of 2021. Now, this contract ended up increasing the value to just under $200 million, which means the total contract value now is $2.03 billion. Yep, science exploration is absolutely not cheap, but it is totally worth it because a lot of great things come out of it, like the technology in your phone. So for anybody that's sitting there going, why are we doing this? So these expenses are pretty much going to cover anything that's necessary to continue out any science missions that Hubble is already doing at the moment. So this includes products and services that are required to execute any of the science, the systems, the engineering, any of the science on the ground, the developments, the science operations, research, the grants. And yes, that also includes the outreach support for Hubble. We all love the outreach support for Hubble. And that also does include the data archive that's going to end up helping future missions that do want to go up in space, such as the James Webb. So the James Webb is set to launch in 2018, and it will end up being the primary observatory in space, since Hubble will end up coming back down. I'm assuming we're going to bring it back down, let it drop, probably on Australia, because Australia likes to get all the random things that fall from the...
Carry on. Let us not speculate just at the moment, thank you.
Did Jen just insinuate that everything garbage falls in Australia?
But have you not heard, every time anything's ever falling, it's in Australia? Have you not noticed that?
It must be because it's the bottom of the world.
You know, I'm going to leave both of you very soon.
I will stop talking.
That's a good plan. Even if it is true.
I know, it's awful. But the thing is that James Webb will continue with all the discoveries it needs to make that Hubble hasn't finished making. But before everybody gets super excited about the James Webb telescope, it's kind of important to give credit where it's due. Now, Hubble was originally launched in 1990. That was a while back, so it's kind of unfair to compare its instrumentation to the James Webb. And it has had quite a bit of flaws. It's been serviced 5 times by astronauts, visited since 1993 to 2009. But every single time it's been serviced, it's been enhanced with its instruments, and its life has been extended. So right now, it is... we're able to, or if anything ever goes wrong, we're able to go right up there and we're able to fix it. And that's actually kind of really important to keep in mind, because once James Webb goes up, we're unable to do that. It's going to be not orbiting the Earth, just above the atmosphere. It's going to be a little bit further away, so we can't kind of just get to it. But originally, NASA's plan was to keep it going until 2020 to make sure it overlaps with the James Webb for its science operations for 1 year. But with this new extension, they're actually going to end up overlapping for 2 years, which makes it really cool because we can hopefully end up pointing both telescopes at the same target and kind of do what the Gemini Observatory does with its telescopes. So I'm kind of really interested to see what we're going to end up doing with that additional year that NASA didn't originally plan to have for Hubble. But Hubble's still sticking around, and it's funded until at least 2021.
And let me jump in here just to fill in the difference in orbits there, because they are really, really different. So Hubble is it at 800 kilometers?
A little lower than that. I think it's closer to 500.
Okay, so it's 500 kilometers, so we call that low Earth orbit. It's just the space station sits at about 400, 450, depending on where it is roughly. So that's low Earth orbit, very, very close to Earth. The geostationary orbit is roughly 40,000 kilometers. So any of your GPS satellites are sitting at 40,000 kilometers away from Earth, very, very far away. The moon is at 300,000, well, between 300,000 and 400,000 kilometers, depending on where it is in its orbit. So it's really, really far away compared to, say, Hubble. And James Webb is going to be at 1.5 million kilometers. So it's really far. It's going to be, it's in the L2 orbit, the L2 Lagrange point, which is a sort of gravitational safe zone on sort of opposite the direction of the sun from Earth, really, really far away. So it's unreachable. Once it's there, you can't service it. It's very far away. And so, as you're pointing out, Jen, it's easy to service the Hubble Space Telescope, but you got to take your time and do it right with James Webb, because once you put it there, you can't go back.
It certainly has its pros and cons of being at that location.
Exactly. So the pros are that it's much further away. It's blocked by sunlight is blocked by the Earth. It's in a very darker sky than Hubble is. So it has its pros for sure.
To be fair, of course, the big sunshade is what is going to protect it most, not the Earth in this regard.
I guess Earth would be a very small point on the sky compared to the sunshade.
That's exactly right. The sunshade is doing a lot of the work here. This announcement, the extension to 2021 from 2016, really doesn't surprise me in the slightest. After the 2009 shuttle servicing mission, Hubble has really been, just ticking along. The commentary that you had, Jen, about, the improved technology, or it might have been Jesse, if one of you said improved technology, we really did soup up the Hubble in the 2009 mission and replaced just about everything, including the kitchen sink. But the only thing that hasn't changed on Hubble is the mirror, really. And as a consequence, it really is performing very well. And so, the James Webb mission has slipped in its timetable continuously, as we are all aware. The 2018 launch looks pretty darn good, but there'll be a commissioning period, of course. So keeping the data flowing from Hubble, what is recognized as astronomy's discovery machine, something that is incredibly well known to the public, not at all a surprise that we got this extension through to 2021.
Yeah, there's over 100,000 scientific papers published based on Hubble's data alone.
100,000. Now, that's a stat that I did not know.
Oh, sorry, 10,000. I'm so sorry.
That's a factor of 10. You're an astronomer. It's okay.
Yeah, close enough. Close enough. No, it was good news, and as I said, hardly a surprise. That the good times continue to roll, I guess, is the bottom line to it.
Very nice. I'm excited about it. I'm a little worried that they're extending it because they think the James Webb will push its date back.
No. Hey, they're covering their bets in this regard, but allowing an overlap in time for 1 or 2 years is not a bad plan either. The wavelength ranges are subtly different, of course. The principal work of the JWST is going to be in the infrared. So, they will complement each other quite nicely, I would think.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so stay tuned, folks. More excitement on the way with Hubble and then JWST. Staying in the solar system, speaking of Hubble, remember those good old days, Jesse, in the late 1980s when Neptune had a great dark spot?
How old do you think I am?
Okay, moving right along. Well,
in the late 1980s, I was 4 or 5 years old.
I was just kidding. I know you're a young whippersnapper. Okay, but those days might be coming back when the great dark spot of Neptune, it sounds like a B-grade science fiction movie, The Great Dark Spot of Neptune. Okay, those days might be returning. Voyager 2 flew by Neptune, the only spacecraft to do so, of course, in August of 1989, and the imagery revealed an enormous dark storm rivaling in size that of the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. And everybody got very excited and thought, well, maybe these big storms are very characteristic of the Jovian worlds, because up until that point in time, we'd not seen Uranus and Neptune do anything terribly exciting. Well, of course, by the time Voyager saw it, it was on its way past and didn't stop for very long, so we weren't in the vicinity of Neptune for any significant period of time. We had to wait until, yes, you got it, the Hubble Space Telescope trained its mirror on the outer planets after, and Jim mentioned this, after the mirror correction, if you will, of 1993, the first servicing mission where we corrected a little bit of spherical aberration. At any rate, when the Hubble Space Telescope started looking at Neptune with enough resolution, guess what? The great dark spot had disappeared, and we ended up back with our fairly featureless blue atmospheric haze all around Neptune. Well, now, of course, Hubble has continued to monitor Neptune, and guess what? It has now revealed the return of a very large disturbance. It's not quite as large as what we saw with with Voyager back in 1989, but it's still a darn good size. Heidi Hamel of the Space Telescope Science Institute is suggesting that the storm is forming at very deep atmospheric depth, a long way beneath the cloud top, and in those layers the air is being pushed, the gases, I guess I shouldn't say air, but the various gases are being forced upwards, and the methane ice crystals are being generated because, of course, deeper in the atmosphere it's warmer. As you're forcing the gas upwards to the colder reaches, the cloud tops of Neptune are, give or take a bit, about minus 190 degrees Celsius, maybe even minus 200. So it's pretty darn chilly up there. The methane ice is crystallizing. There is structure within the dark spot as near as we can tell, and it is suggesting that there might be sort of clearer areas within the spot that is allowing us a deeper look into the atmosphere of Neptune. So needless to say, there's a great deal of excitement, a great deal of interest in monitoring the development of this storm system, often of what is referred to as an anticyclonic storm system. Hubble will be the principal instrument that we'll be using. So stay tuned. More HST weather reports from the outer solar system are coming our way in the very near future.
And who knows, we might get some data from our 60-centimeter telescope of this.
Well, that's the plan. We're all... What? Yes, we're turning our attention. Well, a longer story, which we don't have time to go into tonight. But our own Dr. John Moores and his postdoc, Christina Smith, who is also one of our co-hosts here, have devised a mechanism that they are testing out to go and search for various features on the outer planets of our solar system. Won't go into it in any greater detail, but after OPV finishes tonight, they're going after Jupiter, Saturn, and if all goes well, Uranus and Neptune when they get up later in the summer. So, fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm skeptical of them being able to pull out big dark spots.
Well, that's probably true for Uranus and Neptune, but the technique is being pioneered, shall I say, on Jupiter and Saturn, where features, in fact, are a little more prevalent. So, more soon. We'll get Christina on. She's in the UK at the moment, so after she does a little more data analysis, we'll get her to enlighten us all.
I like it.
Yeah. Speaking of Aurora.
Off to the races. Jump into Aurora. So this is a story that I wanted to talk about because I found it very interesting. It was picked up by CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation here in Canada, and I did a few interviews with it. The sounds that Aurora make. Now, both of you on air with me, have you ever heard the Northern Lights before?
No.
Yeah. Have you ever even heard of the fact that they can be heard?
That I have heard. There have been many reports over the decades of sounds from the Aurora. Sounds like frying bacon and so on.
Jen, have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I've heard of it sort of like in passing. There's possible sounds that can be associated with the Northern Lights. It is, as far as I've ever known, very anecdotal. Very anecdotal that sounds can happen. And so when the story broke... I think it sort of relates to this very, very old world anecdotes, which is why this story got so big. And what I mean by that is if you talk to especially the Inuit in northern Canada, they would tell you without a doubt that the Northern Lights make sounds. But it's never been really it had never been measured in the past. In 2012, a person by the name of Untu Lane from Finland made the first measurement of the sounds made by the Northern Lights. And to be fair, it really is just a correlation, meaning they set up basically three microphones, three very sensitive microphones, and used the three of them to triangulate exactly where the sound was coming from. So the Northern Lights were happening and sounds were found and recorded. They're pops, crackles, whistles, clapping, these kinds of things. And so at the same time as Northern Lights, these sounds happen. And when the Northern Lights aren't there, the sounds don't happen. And it's not every time you get Northern Lights, but it's whenever the Northern Lights are there, it can happen. So that was in 2012. It was measured. So they exist. But the mechanism was not really known. Because if you think about the aurora happened at 100 kilometers above the surface. And I don't know about you guys, but I can't hear anything that's 100 kilometers away. It's very, very right, yeah. And that was the massive skepticism that came along with it, was that it's 100 kilometers away. How could the light be producing sound that you can hear? And now with the new work that's come out recently, it's been, well, in 2012 the sound was triangulated to be 70 meters above the ground, and this recent work was saying that at the same time that these sounds are happening, there is also a meteorological effect called an inversion layer. Have you ever heard of an inversion layer before?
Yes. Yep.
Very common phrase in heavily polluted areas. This is where you have an inversion of the temperature profile near the surface of the Earth. So you normally it's hot near the surface or warmer near the surface of the Earth, and then as you go higher, the temperature drops. But when the temperature can invert, the profile can invert, where you have cold air near the surface and warmer air above, and because cold air falls and hot air rises, there's no mixing allowed, and you create a dome or an immovable layer near the surface of the Earth. It only happens in super cold winter with no wind. And when that happens, not only are you trapping air, you're trapping charged particles. And what Untitled Lane thinks is happening is that when those charged particles are trapped, they're wanting to reconnect with their other pairs so that they can be neutral, but they're blocked from doing so. And when a geomagnetic storm happens at the same time as an inversion layer, the magnetic push, the force that's created by an electromagnetic wobble, actually forces a bunch of those particles to reconnect through the inversion layer, creating sound, a static hiss or a static discharge. And so this is what the proposed mechanism for the sound. What do you guys think? Does it make sense?
I'm going to reserve judgment on that. I mean,
that's what I think.
Certainly what you just said is the closest I have heard to an explanation that would generate sound, because that's been the biggest problem to date. How do you generate sound? It's one thing for us to say in these super cold, very quiet locations that you can hear hissing and popping and so on and so forth. But without a mechanism, you're really strapped to believe that it was associated with the Northern Lights. I mean, we've all stood out on really cold ice floes, and you've heard the cracking of ice. And to be perfectly blunt, that's what I had sort of, tacitly assumed was going on. The very cold environment associated with differing aspects of the physical ice structure upon which I was standing. But what you've just given us, Jesse, at least has some plausibility associated with it, but I'm going to think about it for a little while longer.
And as you should, because all this work hasn't, as far as I know, hasn't been refereed yet. It was published at a conference, it was presented at a conference, and is published in the conference proceedings. And for those listening, a conference proceeding is basically a grouping of the work that was presented at a conference, and work that is presented at a conference is not necessarily been refereed. It's not a professional publication, it's a conference publication. So the work still needs to be looked at by more eyes, and more importantly, it needs to be replicated by more researchers. So as far as I know, Untitled Lane is the only one doing real work in this area.
Well, at least somebody is looking very hard at it.
True.
So, I mean, that's a step in the right direction. I mean, after a while, you've got to wonder, all these people, a significant number of people are commenting that they're hearing aurora. And as I said, this does go back decades. This is not a new phenomenon. There has been commentary about the sounds of aurora probably for 100 years. Certainly many, many decades, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was 100 years. So the fact that so many people are hearing it, you got to wonder, where there's smoke, there's fire, not necessarily in the Arctic, but, you have to think perhaps there is a kernel of truth going on here.
Yeah, and this is, like I said at the beginning, if you were to ask the northern cultures around the world, in Canada, the Inuit, or in Scandinavia or in northern Russia, they would all universally agree that you hear something, but it's just the science needs to catch up.
Absolutely. Well, let's hope that we see something in a refereed journal in the not-too-distant future.
Agreed.
Jen, do you want to take us out to Jupiter?
Absolutely. Well, Juno's almost at Jupiter.
Yay.
Has anybody seen the new image it just released with the...
No.
No. Oh. It's a picture. There's two new images, actually. There's one,
Googling.
I believe, seeing it through infrared, and then there's another one that's seeing Jupiter with its system. They're gorgeous pictures, but I have bad news about that in a second. But let's head to the good news first. So it is en route.
So this is a good news, bad news story. Is that what you're telling me?
It is absolutely has more good news than bad news, I promise.
Okay.
But it is en route, and it's soon going to be in the tight grip of Jupiter, which is the biggest planet in our solar system, so that's always exciting. It will officially arrive on July 4th. Once it does arrive, it's going to start a 20-month mission, and that's a 37-orbit mission. That's a pretty short mission, unlike most of the missions that have been there, like Cassini. But once it arrives, it's going to fire up its main engine for about 35 minutes as it maneuvers into this eccentric polar orbit around the gas giant. So that's going from pole to pole. And it actually recently, on the 11th of June, it began transmitting and receiving signals from Earth. And it does this transmission 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's super great because it needs this constant contact with the mission just to make sure we're fully informed. And it can actually it can send the information back and forth within tens of minutes. So that's really important just in case anything goes wrong. On the 20th of June, it ended up opening up the protective covers that were kind of shielding the main engine from micrometeoroids and interstellar dust. So that's fully opened. The system software that tells the rocket burns how to do everything, which is super important. We've established that's turned on, and we've established a link with it. So everything's a check mark for all of those. There's just one more thing that the team is kind of waiting for right now, and it's super important, and that's the pressurization of the propulsion system. So that's going to occur tomorrow. And then after that, the following day, they're going to shut off all the instrumentation on board, except for anything that's going to help the probe kind of maneuver its way into orbit. And this is kind of super important because it's really critical for the rocket burn to have all the attention and all the power and everything it needs on board. But this, unfortunately, here's the bad news, means that as we get closer and closer, as Juno gets closer and closer and closer, it will not be taking any images during its final approaches towards the planet. But that's okay, and I'll tell you why. When it does get there and it does turn everything on, so it's going to turn everything on 2 days after it arrives, which is great, but it has the specific instrument on it called the Juno Cam. Have you guys heard of the Juno Cam?
Only just now.
Just now. Okay.
Just now.
Just now. All right. Well, it's an outreach instrument on the spacecraft. It's specifically for outreach, which is awesome. It's to take basically the entire public and everybody here on Earth, since it's not a manned mission, it's everybody, along this ride with Juno. So we get to pretty much see everything Juno sees. The Juno Cam is designed to take high-resolution images of Jupiter's poles while it's flying much closer to the plane. And the craft itself actually will end up being a lot closer to the cloud tops of the planet than any mission ever has before. It's actually expecting to also have better resolution images than taken by any spacecraft before. So it wants to
That's exciting news.
Yeah, it wants to break a few records on its end. So as I mentioned, 2 days after it arrives there, so on July 6th, it's going to turn everything back on, including the Juno Cam. And it's expected to start sending back information. I don't know about the data yet. They didn't release when the data dates would be released, but the Juno Cam data specifically will be processed and released to the public in late August or early September. So you don't have to hold your breath all that long. It's almost there. And not much longer after that, we're actually going to be able to start seeing gorgeous images of Jupiter. So it's exciting stuff.
Apparently our own Sky Guide is working with the Juno Cam crowd.
Oh.
Yeah, so we'll keep our ears very close to Michael's commentary so he can give us the updates as we move along. I mean, it's well and truly overdue. We have not had a spacecraft in orbit around Jupiter since 2003, and that was Galileo. And, of course, that's a long, long time ago with the improved technology that's aboard Juno. And as we said earlier, this is the first spacecraft that has flown beyond the asteroid belt with solar panels, not with RTGs on board. This is all a very, very exciting mission, whichever way you want to cut it. So we look forward to those wonderful images up close and personal of the Jovian cloud tops.
Super exciting.
Folks, we are at the top of the hour, which shouldn't surprise us. You've been listening to York Universe, the weekly broadcast of astronomy and astrophysics out of the York University Astronomical Observatory. You have been listening, of course, to Jen and Jesse and myself, Paul. So all has been well here tonight. We've had a very active chat in the chat room. I'm just hoping that my inability to see it was only me and everybody else had a really good time. It is, of course, Astronomy Night in Canada, so by all means, please stay tuned for Western Worlds, Science for the People, Quirks and Quarks. No episode next week, July 4th. No episode next week. We will all return to the airwaves on July 11th, in which time, of course, we'll have lots of terrific imagery from Juno. Good night, folks.
Good night.
Bye.
We hope that you've enjoyed this program from AFM Radio, the broadcast service of Astronomy.fm. This program has been released under Creative Commons license. Please contact us for details. You may find more of our AFM original programs on our website. It's really easy to find us. We are Astronomy.fm. You may also find us in the iTunes radio listings near the top of the News Talk section, and also as an iTunes podcast selection. We'd love to hear your comments. Please email us at radio@astronomy.fm. Thanks so much for being part of the voice of astronomy around the world and across the known universe. This is Astronomy.fm Radio.
AFM.